This video is brought to you by JNF Fusion, fusing JavaScript and FileMaker to create innovative solutions. Hello and welcome JavaScript and FileMaker enthusiasts. Today we're going to cover the basics. I'm going to walk you through creating a JSON and FileMaker integration template that we're going to be using as a starting point for future videos. After creating a new blank database in FileMaker, we're going to be creating the very traditional Hello World project. Not very traditional in FileMaker, I will admit, but certainly traditional when learning other programming languages such as JavaScript. We will be creating 5 different versions of Hello World. The first will be using HTML only. For the second version, we'll add some CSS to transform the HTML. In the third, we're going to use JavaScript to change the Hello World text by manipulating the DOM. Version 4 will entail triggering a FileMaker script from inside JavaScript and passing it a string parameter. And finally, for version 5, we'll do the same thing again, but we'll switch from a string parameter to a JSON parameter. After we've developed and tested those 5 variations, I'll show you how to move things around, split code pieces up for organizational purposes and to set the stage for more complicated solutions in the near future. So stay tuned and let's get started.
Hello, Professor Fusion here. To follow along with the following tutorial, you will need your brain. Please don't forget to bring it along. As far as your skill level goes, we expect that you are familiar with the script workspace in FileMaker, that you have created scripts, some basic calculations, and have a basic understanding of how to use the FileMaker Pro application. If any of these terms sounds a bit confusing, please expect further confusion if you decide to continue watching and listening. There is a minimum software version requirement, namely FileMaker Pro, version 19 or higher. If you do not have this version of the FileMaker application on your computer, please go to www.claris.com/trial to download a free 30-day trial of the application. If you do not have a computer to install this software onto, please go to www.apple.com to purchase yourself an amazing computing device. If none of these options appeal to you, please make yourself a lovely cup of tea, rest yourself in a cozy armchair, and enjoy the show.
After launching FileMaker Pro, go ahead and create a new FileMaker Pro database. Select the blank target, click Create. Give it a name and a location. And let's go ahead and create one initial field. We'll call it something like our text, and it'll just be a text field. And create that. Leave everything else as defaults and click OK. There's our basic first initial layout. Go ahead and go into layout mode. And for now, let's delete that text field. We'll use it later. And go ahead and create a web viewer. And we'll just go ahead and mostly maximize the available space. For the web address, we're going to clear that out. Interaction is great. Let's turn on this bottom one, allow JavaScript to perform FileMaker scripts. Click OK. And let's give it a name. You can use any name you wish, of course, but be sure to remember your exact spelling, including capitalization, because it'll be important each time you reference this particular object. So I'm just going to call it
Leland. Sorry to interrupt, but you have stated something incorrectly. According to online documentation, Claris states that object names are not case sensitive. You're welcome, please continue.
Oh, really? Okay, well, thanks, Professor. So to continue, Web Viewer in camel case, and let's go into browse mode. Next, let's go into script workspace, create a new script. I'm going to paste in here a template that I use with comments at the beginning of every script. This idea mostly comes from fmstandards.org, if you're familiar with that. Let's rename this script to be Hello World HTML only. Now let's create a variable. We'll call it HTML, and I'm going to paste in HTML snippet I already have created and saved. If you're familiar with HTML, this should look fairly familiar. Title is completely unnecessary, probably traditional. You can leave that out. Mostly what we have here is a couple body tags with an H1 element inside with Hello World. And then we will create a script step to insert this into our web viewer. This is where we put in our web viewer name. And instead of resetting, we will go to URL, but we'll put in our HTML variable that's already been declared. Click OK. Save the script. And we can close the script and run from there or from the script menu. And there we have our web viewer filled with our HTML content that we created by variable. One thing I wanted to point out is if we go into layout mode, and instead of leaving this web viewer blank initially, if we fill it with that same HTML code that we have in our variable in our script, and we click OK, and we can see that same code here in the layout mode. Now if we go into browse mode, you notice that same HTML is rendered directly here without a script. Mostly what I want to do is to point out the various ways that we can accomplish the same thing so that you're fully aware at a very basic level how this all works together. So this is an example of straight HTML in a web viewer without any scripts. And then the script that we just created takes a blank web viewer and populates it with the HTML variable. And we end up with the same result. Now let's go back into Script Workspace. Let's duplicate the script and call this one HTML and CSS. Let's open up our same HTML. Now you'll notice in this HTML that I pasted in here that we have to escape out the double quotes here under metadata, and we have to put a quote at the front and the end in order to get this to be able to paste in correctly into the set variable script step. But there's another easier way. If we use the script step called insert text, and we open that up, we can specify the variable name that we want it to be in, which will be HTML. And then for insert text, we can paste in our HTML text snippet and leave it like it would normally be inside of an HTML editor without escaping quotes, without the beginning and end quote, just the straight HTML code. And we can now remove our set variable. And now if we save this script and either run it from here or the script menu, we get our HTML with CSS. If we go back and look at that really quick, we still have our body tags here with the hello world in it with the H1 header tags. But up in our CSS styling, we've declared some formatting for the body and a different set of formatting characteristics for the H1 header. Let's go ahead and duplicate our script again. And let's call this one JavaScript and DOM.
Hello class. Leland has used the word DOM here but has failed to explain who or what DOM is. Are you interested in what DOM he is referring to here? If you are not interested, please plug your listening orifices and hum a tune. The DOM, or Document Object Model, is a standard object model and programming interface for HTML. In other words, the HTML DOM is a standard for how to get, change, add, or delete HTML elements. There, now isn't that an extremely useful definition? Right, Leland, please proceed.
We can change our comments if we wish to be consistent. And let's change our HTML to another copied and pasted value I've already created. And this time, let's take a little look at it. We still have the CSS up here that we had before. We still have our body tag with our H1 header. But what I've done is I've added an ID to the header. We're just calling it HW_H1. And here we're going to write our first JavaScript, and we're going to place the script right here in the body. We're going to do 2 lines of code. The first one is declaring a variable. We're going to call the variable our H1. We're going to use a JavaScript function called document.getElementById. It takes one parameter, and that's the name of the ID that we're desiring. ending with a semicolon, our second line, is using that variable we've just declared, our h1. It's an object that we've been returned from the DOM, and we're going to change its style, its color of style, from whatever it was originally to red. So if we save this and run it, we can see that our color for all of the data inside the h1 element, the CSS style has been changed from its previous value to red. Okay, now we're going to change things up a bit. Let's go into layout mode, and let's change the name of this layout to something to designate the first one, because we're going to create a new one. So I'm going to call this one Template Large Web Viewer. And then I'm going to duplicate this layout and call it same thing but Small Web Viewer. And we're going to take this web viewer and remove that prior content and put back in our HTML variable so that that's all we're populating, even in browse mode it's blank. And then we're going to make this web viewer very, very small, because on the next few versions we're not going to display anything in the web viewer. Matter of fact, I'm just going to add a note right here that this web viewer is displaying nothing. And we'll just make it a little bigger. .24, change the text to white, make a nice big note. And now we're going to go ahead and add that field that we created when we first set up this database, our text field. We'll just make it kind of big out here, just like so. We'll go into browse mode, and now we have a web viewer that's displaying nothing with a little status bar on the top, and our text field, which is, of course, our native FileMaker text field. Now let's go into Script Workspace and duplicate our prior script, and we'll rename this one JavaScript with string parameter. Now, because we have two layouts now instead of one, I'm going to add some context to these previous scripts in our current script. So I'm just going to insert in here some context, which means let's go to a layout, and we'll pick for this particular script our second layout that we just made, and to make sure that we're going into browse mode and showing all records. I'm going to take that same script and paste it back into our prior scripts and put in the correct layout, which is the first layout that we have. And put that in each one of our prior scripts so that if we continue to run these even out of order, we make sure that we're on the correct layout for the correct script. Okay, now we're going to change our HTML code to be this snippet that I've previously created and stored. Now let's take a look at this. I've removed the h1 header within our body, so now our body contains no elements, so this is not going to display anything. And we're going to insert our JavaScript here in the header. Now it can go in the header, it can go down below the body. Location of the JavaScript is not really important at this stage. If we take a look at the contents of this script, it's 3 lines of code, and all we're doing is creating a JavaScript function. Now a function in JavaScript is very similar to a FileMaker script. It's going to be something that we can call, and when it's called, it's going to run, and it has the ability to accept parameters, one or more, and it also has the ability to return a result. And that should sound familiar to you if you're familiar with FileMaker scripts, with being able to pass in one or more parameters, being able to return a result. Very, very similar. Now inside this function that we've created in the JavaScript, which we've called change text, we only have one thing that we're asking it to do, and that is to perform a FileMaker script. And if you're familiar, if you've used this at all, or if you've looked at the documentation for this fairly new script step, you can see it takes two parameters. The first one being the exact name of the FileMaker script, and the second parameter is the actual parameter that will be passed to FileMaker as a string. So in this case, I'm going to call a script we haven't created yet called update text field, and we're going to pass it a string, and the string is going to say hello world dash with a string parameter. So now that we have that in place, it's ready to go, but of course if we run this here, nothing's going to happen because we haven't actually created that script yet. So let's add that now. I'm going to add a divider so that we have a visual separation between our hello world scripts and our utility scripts like the one we're writing now. Then I'll go ahead and take one of those prior ones and duplicate it so that I get the comment template. And I'm going to change the name of this one to that exact script that we have typed in the JavaScript code, which is update text field space, and I'm going to put inside parentheses the parameter value that we're going to be requesting for every time the script is run. Now, this naming scheme is not required, of course, but it's a good standard idea so that you can look at the name of your script and see what parameters you're expecting to be passed in. Now, in this case, we don't need the context. Matter of fact, I'm just going to delete all the steps in here except for our initial template code. And the first thing we're going to want to do is pull out our parameter as the script is beginning, and we're going to put that inside of a variable. And I'm going to call it parameter with the standard getScriptParameter function. Then I'm going to verify that I'm in the correct layout. And this will be our layout that has our text field on it, which is the new layout we just created. And I'm going to set the field, since there's only one record and one field in there. It's about all I'm going to do for context. I'm going to pick which field I want to set, and the value I want to put into it is our incoming parameter variable. So there we have our utility script. What it's doing is it's going to accept one parameter, and whatever is passed in is going to be set into our field, which is called our text. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to our original script. So now if we run this script, you'll notice that nothing happens. And this is expected behavior because if we take a look at our JavaScript that we've written, all we've done is wrote a function.
I believe you meant written.
And inserted it into the web viewer. But we have, as of yet, never called it. Never called this function change text. So let's do that now. After we've inserted our JavaScript code into our web viewer, let's go ahead and trigger that with a perform JavaScript in web viewer step. So we'll need to provide the name of our web viewer. Then we need to provide the name of our function, our JavaScript function, which we called change text. And our change text JavaScript function does not request any parameters. So now if we save this and run, we get our expected result. Our text field has been changed. So let's kind of step through that again and make sure that we've followed along with what we've done here. We've created a hello world script. In this script, we've made sure we've put ourselves on the correct layout to show the field that we want. Then we've created some HTML without any CSS this time and without any body content this time. Just a JavaScript function called changeText that does one thing when it's called. When it's called, it triggers a FileMaker script. And that script is what takes an incoming parameter and actually sets the field. We trigger that by performing the JavaScript in the web viewer and calling that function that we've written called changeText. And for our fifth hello world, let's go duplicate our script, change the name of it to JS with JSON parameter. And we're going to use the same context. All of the rest of the script steps will be the same except for our HTML code. So if we open that up and I'm going to replace this with some pre-made text. If we take a look at this, we've got our same function that we built on our last version with one function, change text. And what we've done is we've created 2 lines of code inside this function. The first one declares a variable, which is actually going to be a JSON object, and you'll notice that the curly brace variable value doesn't have quotes around it. It's just curly braces. That designates a JSON object, and inside that we have a single key value pair, the key called incoming JSON, and the value hello world with a JSON parameter. So that's our first line. Our second line of code is familiar by this point, which is we're going to perform a FileMaker script, the same script we used last time, update text field. I'm going to change this to the string so that we don't have to modify our existing FileMaker script. And we're going to pass in a parameter, but this time it's not going to be a string constant. This time we're going to use a JavaScript function called json.stringify, and it takes one parameter, and what it does is it converts a JSON object into a string. And as you're aware, the perform script in FileMaker requires that the incoming parameter is a string. So this does the work for us. This converts our object from this line into a string, passing it into FileMaker into our script. So with that, let's save that and run it. And there we go, our expected behavior. But do you notice the problem I notice? Look at the string parameter that got passed into our script. It's the JSON object converted into a string. So that's not really what we were looking for. So it's partial expected behavior. If we go back into the script workspace, if we take a look at our update text field script, you can kind of see what's going on. We're taking the full entire script parameter in from JavaScript and passing it into our text field. The problem is that we want to actually parse part of the string out of the JSON object. So what we can do here is create another variable and use FileMaker's JSON getElement function to take the entire parameter and pull out just the key value pair that we're interested in. And the key for that is incoming JSON. So if we put that in here, and we're calling this variable the string, change this to match that, save that, and run it. Now we get our expected behavior. Now that our 5 Hello World versions are complete, at the beginning of this video I explained that one of the purposes of this video was to not only do Hello World 5 different ways, but also to provide you with a basic template that we're going to use in future videos. That's what we're going to do now. If we go into our script workspace, I'm going to create another separator, and let's just create a new script there. And I'm going to paste in some pre-made script code, which will include my typical comments up above, but it'll also provide the context that we've become familiar with, which is I'm going to pick the new layout that has the small web viewer and our text field on it. Then I'm going to navigate to that field and clear it so that every time we run any of these scripts, it initially clears that text field so that we can truly see the workings of our code actually changing the text in that field or populating it. And now what we're going to do is explain a little bit of how I'm going to split this code up. What do I mean by that? If we hide the script and go into layout mode and double click on our web viewer, I'm sure you understand at this point, but I'll reiterate that we have been populating this web viewer with the contents of a variable. In this case, our variable is named HTML. But we don't need to do all that. We could take the entire HTML code, CSS, JavaScript, put it all together in a single text block and paste it right here, and everything would still work exactly the same. But as you start to develop more and more JavaScript code, more complicated HTML, more complex CSS code, it gets pretty lengthy. Isn't there a better way to organize it? And that's what I'm going to show you. So for now, we'll leave this just the way it is. We'll go back to our script workspace. And we'll start with HTML. So let's start with our insert text script step. And we will call our target HTML. And again, I will paste in some pre-made HTML code, like so. And let's take a minute to take a look at this. What is it that I've done? Well, we have a lot of our standard HTML that we've used in our previous versions of Hello World. But here's our first change. I've inserted a very odd looking bit of syntax between the CSS style elements. Then we have our body with nothing in it. Then we have the same thing here with script. We have an interesting placeholder here for our JavaScript. Now these placeholders can be anything you wish. If you've ever worked with Microsoft Word, merge documents, or form letters, you'll understand the concept. What it is it's a way to use FileMaker substitute function to find a specific place in this variable and replace its text contents. So the finished product in the web viewer, we do not want double star CSS, double star script. We want these two pieces of text replaced with our actual code. And so these are just placeholders, and they can be anything, but you do want them to be very, very unique, and you just need to be consistent with whatever your naming scheme. On either side of the words, you can use asterisks, underscores, odd characters. Do whatever you wish, but just be consistent. So here's our HTML. I'm going to duplicate this line rather than type it from scratch. I'm going to change the target. Instead of a variable named HTML, let's call this one CSS. And again, I'm going to paste in here some preformed CSS. It should look familiar to you. It's a CSS that we've used previously. Short and sweet. We'll duplicate that line. We will change the target from CSS to JavaScript. And inside here, I'll do the same thing. Paste in some pre-made code. One of the things I haven't mentioned, it may or may not be obvious to you, right here, our very first line that I put here begins with a double slash. That same double slash is used in FileMaker as a comment inside the calc engine. So you can do the same thing here in JavaScript. That just designates that line will be a comment and ignored by the compiler. And here's our simple function change text that we used in our last Hello World version 5. So with that, now we have 3 different variables. And what we're going to do is combine them into one. Put a note here, combine into one. I'm going to paste in a pre-made variable, and here's what it looks like. It's a simple substitution. And what we're doing is we're replacing our original HTML code, and we're replacing those placeholders, the CSS, the script, with our 2 variables that have already been declared. So this one single line combines all 3 of those variables into one. And more than just concatenating them, it's actually putting the CSS and the script variable contents into very specific spots. The CSS is going to be replaced right there, and the JavaScript is going to be replaced by right there. This, when it's complete, can be short, it can be lengthy, it can be totally copied and pasted directly into the web viewer. It matters not. It all ends up doing the same thing. Our last step is to populate our web viewer with the combined HTML data. One last step is to trigger our function that we wrote in JavaScript called change text. So this, once the JavaScript is inserted into the HTML is inserted into the web viewer. The web viewer now has all of our code sitting idle, doing nothing. This last line 44 of our script actually triggers that one function that's in there. So now if we save and run, there's our expected result. So what I want you to take away from this is your basic template for JavaScript work. Basically, all you need is this one single script, and I'm going to rename this script Inject HTML. And that single script right here can be copied and pasted into whatever solution you wish to add your JavaScript to or to work with. All you need to do is add a web viewer on a layout. Make sure, as far as context is concerned, that you've navigated to that layout that has the web viewer. Run this script, and this will instantly take all of your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, combine them together as in a very organized fashion, populate it into the web viewer, and then this very last line, of course, can be changed, removed, and you can find other ways of triggering your JavaScript depending upon your use case scenario. But these steps should help you to create your basic template that can be used in very lengthy projects dealing with lots of code in a very organized fashion and end up with the results that you're looking for. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. Check the description below for any applicable web links that we might have mentioned, or for even more information on the topics we covered here today. As always, we encourage you to click both the like and subscribe buttons and look forward to reading your comments should you choose to share them. Be sure to check out our current offerings on our website at www.jffusion.com. And hopefully you will return to this channel many times in the near future as we continue to offer you various tutorials on fusing JavaScript with FileMaker Pro for creating amazing and innovative solutions.